Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Cloud security and compliance is a topic that draws emotion, excitement, worry, and at times confusion. We'll do our best today to help clarify the topic, dispel common myths and concerns, and hopefully increase your confidence in your own cloud security strategy. I'm Brian DiPaolo, Vice President of Strategic Services at Accudata Systems. We're a Texas-based IT consulting firm focused on helping customers secure, modernize, and grow with the help of leading technology. I'll be your moderator for today. Before I introduce our panel, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. We'll be taking live questions at the end of the panel, so feel free to submit those questions during the session, and I'll do my best to ensure that we get to all those questions, but if we don't, I will personally address them via email after the webinar. The session will be available on demand approximately an hour upon completion, and you'll receive a post-event email with a link to the on-demand session as well. So without delay, let's introduce our panel. I'd like to start with Bruce Beam, Director of Information and Security within IC Squared. Bruce, tell us about yourself.
Good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me. I am the director here at IC Squared. I oversee all application development, security, infrastructure, and all those types of roles here. I've been in, I'm a 27-year Navy veteran and hold several security certifications and have a deep background in the security and a love for security in general.
Great. Tim, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So glad to be here. Tim Sills with also Accudata Systems, and I work with the risk and compliance team. So I do PCI assessments, pen tests, and cloud security audits. Also, too, I would like to mention that key takeaways here we hope that attendees get from this is that they understand that cloud security isn't something that's very difficult to do. It just takes a little bit of planning and thought to lock down the environment.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And next, we have Dimitri McKay with Splunk.
Good morning. Thanks for having me also. My name is Dimitri McKay. I've been with Splunk specifically for almost 7 years, but I've been in security for well over 20 years. I spent my time during my career doing everything from penetration tests to vulnerability assessments. Today at Splunk, I spend my time helping customers understand what their maturity is from a security perspective and where they are versus where they want to be and sort of roadmap how to get them there.
Thanks, Dimitri. We appreciate you joining today. So I think at this time, let's go ahead and get started. Again, our goal today is to bring clarity to that cloud security and compliance landscape. While complex, we're going to try and keep it simple and give you distinct implementable action items that that really you can start using today. So to cover today's topics, we're going to break it up into four major areas. Really how to start that cloud journey with keeping security top of mind. We're going to talk about roles and responsibilities when dealing with the cloud. And next, we'll talk about tools. And finally, we'll wrap up with budget. So to get started, our first group of questions is going to be focused on that journey to the cloud. So again, imagine the scenario of your leadership has tasked you with a cloud-first strategy. Or maybe you've already have that buy-in and large portions of your infrastructure have already moved to the cloud. But ultimately, you haven't built that specific cloud security strategy. Either way, really it comes down to where do you start with controls and governance in the cloud. So I'd like to give an opportunity to our panelists to respond. So I want to start with Bruce and his experience at IC Squared. Really, I guess, Bruce, where do you start?
Well, thanks, Brian. Where do you start? And that's probably one of the most critical questions you can ask. My previous company I came from, we were on a cloud journey. And here, when I joined IC Squared in January, we were already on the journey. And from both of those experiences, what I've seen is start with the end in mind and a very good set of requirements. And what capabilities you need. When you start, often what I've seen in some implications that neither I've been involved with is it started in the middle. It started with someone, bring in a cloud service or just kind of piece parting it together. And when you get true requirements and you get buy-in and true capabilities and know where, have an insight in mind, that's what's, to me, the most important. And this is a very general guidance, I know, and it may seem very simple, but it's some companies and many companies have fallen in the trap of just, again, stepping into it and not realizing they were already in a transition, or that there was some kind of divergence and they didn't plan for it, and it would really cost them later in the end in makeup time, looking for security, compliance, and those type of areas where it would cost them dearly.
Thank you, Bruce. That helps. I guess, Tim Sills, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Bruce hit a lot of key points. I think the other thing too also is keeping in mind that a lot of the on-prem controls and policies that you already have should extend to the cloud from a data privacy and network architecture perspective. So certainly some of the stuff you already have should be able to translate to it. So that means ensuring, for instance, like the environment segmented, so that in the cloud the resources are hardened. You have their data security measures are in place, like encryption. So probably already things that you're already doing in an on-prem environment, just making sure that you translate those over into the cloud environment.
Well, so to continue on that topic, you mentioned extending on-prem to the cloud. Do you feel customers fully understand those nuances with cloud security and how it parallels on-prem security in their strategy?
Yeah, no, I think that's also a key challenge. So a lot of times we see where it breaks down when they seems like there's a failure of translating that over to the cloud. And a lot of times I think that's because of the unknowns within the cloud. So each of the cloud providers is very specific in terms of their configuration. And so sometimes that those configuration details aren't always carried over.
Yeah, no, and we see that challenge a lot across a lot of our customers. I guess, Dimitri, I'd like to get some of your feedback. I guess specific to your experience, what are the biggest mistakes organizations can make when they trying to undertake that cloud security initiative?
Sure. So, well, I think most companies jump in, or at least attempt to jump in with both feet when they first get started. And that's a mistake. Starting with policy procedure, but make sure that the right parties are included. So get your risk and compliance team involved. Get your the IT ops team and sales. Get all stakeholders involved, so that there's a clear understanding of what the goals are, and you need their buy-in. I've always said you can outsource responsibility, but you can't outsource accountability. Responsibility versus accountability. So get the stakeholders involved and make sure that with those acceptable use policies that they're enforced. So we often see what I refer to as cloud sprawl, which is when IT ops or development goes out and starts using just random cloud services on their own. And the issue with that is often developers will use live data in instances that are not tied to the corporate security policy and procedure. And that's terrifying. And we see it all the time. And that often leads to breaches.
No, that's great feedback. We see that we do a lot of PCI assessments, and that's we see that specifically where that production data gets moved in those dev environments. I think you brought up a good point about getting stakeholders involved, and I'd like to come back to Bruce, since he has, with his specific role at IC Squared. I guess Bruce, can you give us maybe some feedback on how stakeholders were involved in your process and journey to the cloud and that cloud security?
Sure. That was a key element, is getting stakeholders involved, to make sure your stakeholders are involved and you get a very good set of baseline requirements and capabilities that are required. Couple that with executive leadership and sponsors, those are pivotal. And when you can bring those together and you can focus on the mission, that really makes a big difference in the journey. Dimitri brought up a great point of talking about all the sectors that can spin off. It's very easy for one department to take out a credit card and start buying a cloud service. And the next thing you know, they've put sensitive data in the cloud, and you've wound up in a really bad place to start. But with this buy-in from the stakeholders and the executive leadership, and really one of the things they chose to do here was funnel most of this through my department called the Transition Program Office. and allow it that way. We can look at any types of shadow IT. We can look for these types of things, and we can move forward as a unified front, addressing what is most important to the enterprise as we move forward in security, through compliance, all the needs that we have. And again, that stakeholder buy-in, it was key all the way through.
Yeah.
No, that's great feedback, guys. I mean, ultimately, what I'm hearing is it's really all about requirements, getting stakeholders involved, and that's really the natural place to start. So no, thank you for the feedback. So I'd like to move on to the next topic. So I was able to attend the IC Squared security conference a few weeks ago, and a common theme I heard when talking to a lot of the attendees was security teams are extremely lean, and obviously that's really no surprise, probably for most. But when you start thinking about moving to cloud and its requirements around security and compliance and the impact of resources, this brings up real challenges. So I'd like to really start with Tim and get his feedback. How should a lean security organization handle delegation of responsibilities, especially when it comes to the cloud?
Yeah, so thanks, Brian. I actually see Bruce and Dimitri already kind of touched on this, so they've already laid the groundwork, and that really it's first and foremost getting everyone involved, getting an understanding of what's even out there. So I think Dimitri may have mentioned cloud sprawl, and so unfortunately some of those departments, particularly DevOps, has a tendency to kind of spin up environments. So first and foremost is getting a handle on what's out there, and then from that, right, establishing your change management controls and getting deployments with approved templates and architecture. So something like CloudFormation templates, and then on top of that, just utilizing logging. So using like the tools to maintain awareness of your environment and things along those lines. So maybe even going so far as looking at like cloud management service provider tools as well to kind of give you that extra visibility into an environment. So yeah, so I think collectively it's going to be using some of those tools and just kind of having that awareness of what's going on out there.
No, and that's great feedback. I think, I guess, Dimitri, I'd like to get your input on that, because Tim hit on some of these topics maybe around efficiency and repeatable processes and so on. I guess, what is your feedback on that in terms of what can those lean organizations do to drive that efficiency and repeatable cloud security approaches, policies, governance?
Sure. Yeah, the first thing is to realize that on-prem policy should not be different than in-cloud policy. They should be seamless. And as far as a centralized data, it's funny because when I started at Splunk, logging was really not something most companies did, but now we see a lot of the cloud providers are also offering some sort of cloud log management. And the challenge is that customers now have one cloud silo for cloud and one silo for on-prem at minimum. At minimum, I've seen places that have, each group has their own strategy. For security, that's a problem, because when you're doing an investigation, you have a very short window from which to start and finish. And you can't take 4 months to go through everyone's different silos in order to find what you're looking for, to sort of take that data and graft a story. So having a centralized solution, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on-prem, either or, as long as you have one, that helps in investigation. Especially if we look at the metrics, you have a 66% chance of hearing about your breach from a third party, which means you have a 33% chance of finding it on your own. So when your investigators come in, they need that data. Now, the other thing I'd add is, from a rules and regulations perspective, where you start, and this is important for lean organizations, is start with a set of requirements that might be based on what's important to your business. So that might be a compliance mandate, that might be the CIS 20, that might be one of the ISO standards. But start with something that is easily, it's easy to map to most important things. A lot of lean organizations they're all over the place. They're not focused on how breaches happen, which is endpoint, and they're not focused on where the data lives, the actual important data, email, databases, etc. And they focus on things like firewalls, which are great, proxies, great, but how people get in and what is stolen, those are the two places that should be focused on. Don't try to boil the ocean.
No, that's great insight, and I definitely I think one of the things that we see as a very common issue is where we see those repositories of data, and specifically security data, spread across those multiple log servers or multiple locations, and that causes a challenge or creates a challenge being able to really piece together those issues or really investigate them properly. So that's great feedback. I guess I want to jump to Bruce to wrap up this section, and because we're talking about lean organizations, obviously I'd like to understand what was IC Squared's experience in staffing to support cloud security.
Well, first, thanks for joining us at Security Congress. And I gave a presentation there, and one of the kind of the key message there was automation and integration. Because there is not, I've not talked to one leader that says I'm overstaffed, and I don't think you have either. Too many people don't know what to do with them. So what we have to do is work smarter, not harder. And by doing that, we bring in the right tools. And we also have to spend the capital to make sure that we're taking the tools and we're automating them and we're integrating them. So we don't have 15 dashboards, 20 red flashing lights, all those things that can detect a threat that's there that may be inside your environment, and the other 66% are reporting to you, but we can't see because all the lights are red. So if you can go with a kind of a mantra of orchestration and automation, and again, making sure you put the time and the money in to do it right, I think that's a key enabler. Now, the way that you bring this to the next level and talk to the executives about it is you look at your appetite for risk. You see how much risk the enterprise, whatever you're working with, what's their appetite for risk in the cybersecurity, information security world. If you have a very low tolerance, then that means you do have to have either these tools in place or the personnel. And that's the way you justify this budget, and that's the way you staff. And so that's the way I found a balance of bringing the right tools, the right level of automation, and then also the right level of staffing to meet our risk appetite here at the enterprise.
No, thank you for that insight and your specific experience. One other thing I'd like to follow on to that question is, because I see a lot of inconsistency depending on the organization, but do you have any cloud-specific group or a cloud-specific role, a cloud architect and so on, that's playing a role in security or being used to fulfill your resource obligations?
Actually, we have this covered in two different ways. One, we do have someone that specifically focuses on cloud for us, and so looks at the management of it. We are a smaller organization, so we don't have a cloud team. We have one person that's specifically focused here, but we also look at outside resources and partners to help us in this journey. But we make sure we choose these partners wisely, and we make sure that, again, we bring this information in, it falls under this standardized policy and guidelines that does, as Tim was talking about, make sure our on-prem and our cloud environment resemble each other very closely.
Great. No, thanks for that insight. I definitely wanted to get that across for those listening in, just in terms of what you're trying to do internally. So next I want to move on to our third section, and really you can see from the discussions we're having today, we're really trying to focus on strategy over picking that next shiny technology or tool. But ultimately, when you're making some of those decisions, there is at some point you need to choose those best tools and solutions to support cloud security. So Bruce, I'd like to come back to you again. In your experience, ultimately at a high level, can you tell us how IC Squared has chosen their cloud security stack of solutions?
Sure. The way it was chosen, again, going back to stakeholders and requirements, that was the key enablers here. We went and we actually brought in an outside, independent party, trusted third party to work with us. So we didn't get tunnel vision. So we didn't, because sometimes it's very easy to get the tunnel vision internally. When you bring in an outside partner that is trusted, and you're listening to the stakeholders, and you're listening to executive, and you're looking at the overall company strategy, you start picking tools and that you can grow with, that are well known. The term I like to use, best of breed. So something that's known and that you can build upon. I like to call them building blocks. Without going into specifics, we have several building blocks that we chose on this journey. And now what we found is as we bring in other parts of this, they're more like snap connectors that we can bring in. We can add a different application or program and continue to grow inside the same environment that's very known, very reliable, and helps provide our total cost of ownership as well.
Great. No, that's definitely very helpful. So what's great is, on the call today, we obviously have Bruce from the end user organization side. We have Dimitri from the manufacturer side, and Tim from the consulting side. I'd like to get all those perspectives. So Dimitri, if we jump to you next, Splunk is an industry leader in cloud security. So can you give us some perspective of the driving factors and market indicators that are driving the user experience and the solution set from your vantage point at Splunk?
Driving user experience and solution set. Probably fear and dollars. So when I look across the landscape today, dollars are always the biggest drivers. In security, there was the fear that we were resistant to moving to cloud, and a lot of the compliance mandates were also pretty slow to adopt cloud. So it sort of held things up. The business saw the potential savings, and security, we're a little bit paranoid, right? That's our job, be a little paranoid. So we had some cultural challenges that were based on fear. It was the fear of losing control. It was the fear of not having my own data. I think about, I used to use music back in the 90s, right? I had CDs. I owned it. It was something I could touch. It was tangible. Moving to getting rid of all my MP3s later, it's terrifying. Now I use Spotify, right? I use the cloud service. Instead of owning something, I don't need to. I just enjoy it. And that's the same thing with cloud adoption, which is when we look at the price, owning a bunch of CDs versus just using a Spotify as a monthly service, and the price difference is huge. And I get so much more. When it came to cloud, it's the same thing. It's companies, the business saw the benefit right out of the gate, but security we were slow to adopt out of fear because it's cultural. And so what's really driving user experience and solution set is we need to recognize first that we can't just have we've often seen user experience is here and secure is here, and it's a spectrum. It's either the more secure you get, the less user experience you get. And in a lot of ways, cloud is solving a lot of that. It's making things easier to use, but also more secure if done right. So I'd say the things driving user experience and solution set, absolutely, it's dollars, and it's also fear.
No, we've definitely seen that across organizations. Obviously, board of directors coming in or leadership in organizations and concerned about breaches and so on. So that definitely fear is a big piece of that. I would like to point out that Spotify is not one of our sponsors today, but I am a big fan myself. So, jumping to the next question, I want to kind of link this on to Tim's perspective, right? So coming from an IT consulting organization at Accudata, how do you help IT organizations select the right tools? Is there a specific methodology you're following?
Well, I mean, certainly the guys already touched on some excellent key points, right? But really, it's about getting your arms around what those services are, what's out there, and understanding it. And then once you do that, then you can say, okay, here's some technologies that address those particular needs. And certainly, too, keep in mind that going to the cloud, this is a new environment. You're going to be enabling new services and functionality that you've probably never seen or used before. So your vectors of attack and your attack surface just got a lot bigger. So it's going to take a shift in that and looking at some different technologies and maybe that aren't on your radar. And so making sure that you address those new vectors of attack. And so, with that in mind, that's how you start kind of backing your way into it is, hey, here's the functionality and the services. Some of it's kind of new, and then looking at what we can use there. And then obviously, too, and I think even Dimitri touched on this, is some overlap, or Bruce may have, where looking at getting the most bang for your buck. So some of those services, making sure they cover multiple applications, and maybe even different cloud providers. So, we see hybrid environments where customers have a foot in both of the popular cloud environments. And so looking at something that even overlaps with that are key points.
Great. No, thank you for that insight. I guess to jump to our last area, which we have to cover, is budget. And I want to get some feedback from really everyone here, but I'll start with Bruce and really around. I'm trying to understand what are those top recommendations to IT leadership to help validate, really drive that ROI, or maybe it's not ROI, but how do you justify that security spend? So Bruce, maybe can you give us some insight with how you dealt with it at IC Squared?
Sure thing. The thing you first have to look at is, what is your business model? That's really what you have to draw back. Are you looking at an OpEx, a CapEx, those type of models? Once you differentiated that, you obviously in the cloud environment, you're going to be moving toward an OpEx model. And then at that point, as you move toward this, you need to couple this with your enterprise risk, something I talked about before, your appetite for risk. And that gives you a baseline of what you want to do, of how much you want to spend, and how basically of how scared you want to be, as Dimitri would say, toward providing security. And ultimately, you've got to answer the question of, are we secure? Because we're being held accountable for securing all this, and we have to use our dollars very wisely. And if that part of that is, putting the dollars in the right place for security based on risk, it's also looking at, I think someone mentioned before, cloud sprawl, looking at all the different pieces, getting something I like to call, as Tim was talking about, a twofer. If I have some service, I can get 2 or 3 services out of this at the same time. That's even better. So these are all part of the calculation that I put together and try to look at for a total cost of ownership as we move into a project. Because the bigger part is also the out years. Looking at this, it's great when you're doing your initial buy-in and you're in a CapEx model and you've got the first year or so. But then after you've bought into this, what's this look like for the end run? There used to be the day when you could almost stop paying if you really needed to. Once you've moved into a cloud first footing, those days are over. When you stop paying, you stop getting services. So all this should go into your calculations as you're looking at this for both operations and security.
No, thank you for that insight. I guess I'll jump over to, I guess I'll go back to Tim. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Bruce touched on a lot of it already. So, I mean, again, to try to make sure that they're applicable, I think that's the key item there, is that what it is. So historically, maybe some of that spend has gone towards maybe some of the endpoint technology or some of that, and now it needs to shift over to a different part of the network, particularly, let's say, like encryption or something, that at rest, where normally that's maybe at the bottom of the list from a technology perspective. So I think it's going to be that shift towards looking at what your deployment is and how that architecture is and those services, and kind of making sure that it addresses those specific needs first and foremost.
Great. Dimitri, do you have anything to add to that response around budget?
Sure. So we're seeing an evolution of the CISO. They sort of started up through the IT chain. Started at the bottom of help desk, worked their way up to CISO. Yeah. Unfortunately, they have a skewed view of the business. Their concern is around IT risk, not business risk. Now we're seeing less and less of that. We're seeing the evolution of IT and security being more of a business. So depending on where that CISO sort of lives in that, the advice might be different. The path I'm trying to lead them down is, I usually start with a thought exercise. And that thought exercise is, let's pretend that your entire infrastructure is wiped out. Meteor crashes, takes out your data centers, and there's no cloud. What do you start with? What do you rebuild to get the business moving again? And we often see a response, and this is usually a telltale sign. If the response is, oh, you start with firewalls and routers. No. You don't start with servers. You start with applications. And the applications that you start with, and this helps define the mentality of the CISO. If they respond with, well, email would be first, that's correct. That's the medium of communication, internal and external. The next should be whatever the company uses to make money. So if they're in manufacturing, they want to stand up the manufacturing process. Whatever it takes to make money. If a sales company, the sales organization needs their tools, that needs to get going. And the last thing would be customer service for both internal and external. Make sure people are getting paid, but also make sure customers are getting what they need to maintain those customers, to retain those customers. So business versus IT is the evolution. But the other thing I'd say is security needs to add value to the organization. in the past, we might have had 9 or 10 different ways of authenticating. I look across organizations through Active Directory, and I can see that there's usually 7 or 8 accounts for every user. That's insane. When really, at the end of the day, the value that we can add in security might be something as simple as central auth, right? Using something like Okta as a tool to authenticate to everything instead of having a bunch of different accounts, which is annoying for a user to have 92 different accounts per. So add value is the recommendation I'd make to the C-suite, because in the past, security, I've never seen somebody say I have too much money in security. I have too much budget. Throw $1 million at IT ops, you'll see happier customers, maybe happier employees internally, depending on what you spend it on. Throw $1 million at security, I don't know if I've made a difference in threat or risk.
Well, no, that's great feedback, because I mean, really, I think that's applicable to security as well as just operating your IT organization. We've seen a lot of evolution around IT organizations really trying to deliver IT as a service, try to provide value and better alignment with the business. I mean, ultimately, that's where IT stops being looked at as so much of a cost center. So I think that was great feedback, and I appreciate everybody's excellent input today. We really covered some really great topics. At this point, what I'd like to do is jump over to some questions, and I've been monitoring this. We've had a number of questions come in during the webinar so far. I'm going to just go ahead and jump into these questions across the team, and we'll go from there based on the time we have. So really, I guess I'm going to start with Tim. One of the first questions that came in, what are the types of breaches we're seeing in customers, primarily in the cloud? So really, if you're looking at a cloud first type customer, what are those breaches you need to be worried about, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, it just seems like, if anything, it's data leakage. When you look at the different breaches throughout even the last couple months, year, it's really misconfiguration of the cloud settings. So it seems to be the most common vector of attack, unfortunately. And again, I think we touched on this earlier, in that each cloud provider's console, their interface is unique to them, and so there are a variety of menu choices. So with that said, it's pretty easy to overlook some of those system settings, and that will lead to data exposure. So quite frankly, just a simple tick of a box to enable encryption at rest. I mean, people don't realize that, like in AWS, if you do that, then those backups of that data also will be encrypted at rest. So yeah, unfortunately, it's just that data leakage is what seems to be the most common issue right now.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that. If you think about many of the recent breaches that we all see in the news, I mean, it's some sort of data leakage or data loss of some sort. I guess maybe jumping over to, let's see, the next question I want to pose over to Bruce, and the question is, what certifications and controls should I expect of cloud providers I use? So I guess if you are an organization, you're going to go out to Azure or AWS or maybe some other SaaS provider. What should you expect in terms of the certifications from those organizations?
Great question. Well, first off, I would look at my roadmap. I think Dimitri talked about, pick a standard. And that's one of the things you're going to have to do, whether it's ISO or whatever it may be. Look at the standard, and also look at your requirements and your customers' requirements. And by that, I mean, if your customer has a requirement for some type of PCI, then you need to make sure your provider covers that as well. You need to look at your footprint. Are you, US only? Are you global? Are you going to be operating within the EU for certain things? So those are the kind of questions you really need to look at, and this all drives back to your requirements. What are your requirements? Because it would really be easy to go over budget to try to find somebody that had many types of certifications, or like you're talking about, that would be unnecessary. So just make sure you're meeting the requirements you set forth.
So I'm hearing a theme. Requirements are important from the very start. So good feedback. Let's see here. We've got, so I'm gonna direct this question to Dimitri. If my hybrid environment spans on-premise and multiple cloud environments, how does the impact of my approach to securing, or how does that impact my approach to securing the cloud environment? So I guess, again, maybe you've got some systems in Azure, some in AWS, some at various sites on-prem. I guess really, how does that factor into your approach?
Shouldn't. I mean, if you're starting with the right policy and procedure in place, then those should be applicable both on-prem and across your various cloud providers. Just make sure that based on your requirements that those cloud providers can actually provide you the services for. So for example, Tim was talking about at-rest encryption. If the provider is not offering it, that's one of your requirements, they're not the right cloud provider for you. But set the charter up front, set the requirements up front, and then find a cloud provider that can satiate those requirements. But they should be a standard across all, both on-prem and cloud providers.
No, that's great feedback, and again, I think we've seen back to your earlier comments. I think this gets into centralizing some of that data as well, right? Where you don't want to have different repositories in each of these different environments. You've got those policies, requirements, and find things that they're going to allow you to centrally manage it. So I think that's great feedback. Really looking at the time, I believe we're really out of time for more questions. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, what we'll do is for any questions that still come in, and please don't stop submitting questions before this webinar closes, we will absolutely get back to you via email. But with that, I'd really like to thank our panel for joining us today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining and listening, and I hope that really provided some value and some insight that you can take forward in your cloud environment. Thank you so much.